That down on my introduction. All right, are you doing?
You got your guys?
I am ready. Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
So just to save time, I'm not gonna come up there. I'll just get right into.
Yes.
Still out there.
So,
I always forget.
yeah.
I always forget to make sure you have your phones turned off. I always forget to say that. Thanks for your patience, everyone.
all right. I will start with the introduction, and that way, anyone that I think everyone is back. Is anyone missing a person that they came with? All right. All right, well, thank you all so much for joining us. This is Left Bank Books and Schlafly Public Library presents best-selling historian and journalist Rinker Buck, who will discuss the eagerly awaited return of the American master storyteller for his new book, Life on the Mississippi. And I do want to apologize for the delay this evening, but I want to thank you all so much for your patience and for being here. It is because of your support that we were able to bring in such incredible authors like Rinker Buck. When you support Left Bank Books, your money goes directly into the local economy. It helps keep our bookstore open and recover from the flood that we've recently encountered. It also helps keep your libraries funded, like the one we are in. It helps keep your parks free, your streets paved, and so many other things that make St. Louis a wonderful place to live. And I want to thank you all for shopping local and for supporting this event. We also want to welcome our virtual audience who is joining us from near and far this evening. I'm Shane Mullen. I'm the event coordinator for Left Bank Books. I help produce our hundreds of author events each year with a fantastic team here in St. Louis. It is our pleasure to be able to host events here at the Schlafly Public Library. They are an incredible partner to have for events. We are doing a lot of events this fall, so be sure to check out our event calendar for our near daily announcement about upcoming events that we have. And I'm certain that there will be an event that you will be interested in. But now about tonight's book. This is the eagerly awaited return of American master storyteller Rinker Buck, Life on the Mississippi. It is an epic, enchanting blend of history and adventure in which Buck builds a wooden flatboat from the grand flatboat era of the 1800s and sails it down the Mississippi River, illuminating the forgotten past of America's first Western frontier. 7 years ago, readers across the country fell in love with a singular American voice, Rinker Buck, whose infectious curiosity about history launched him across the West in a covered wagon, pulled by mules, and propelled his book about the trip, the Oregon Trail, to 10 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. We were so lucky to get to host Rinker Buck, and at that time, I was one of the people working that event. It was phenomenal. Now, Buck returns to chronicle his latest incredible adventure, building a wooden flatboat from the bygone era of the early 1800s and journeying down the Mississippi River to New Orleans. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch calls it a rich mix of history, reporting, and personal introspection. I see Buck at the helm of the Patience when I read Twain's description of a riverboat captain. A pilot in those days was the only unfettered and entirely independent human being that lived on the earth. And I will say that I have already read the book. It is phenomenal. Everyone who already bought it, you are in for an incredible trip, both literally and also down the river. Our author this evening, Rinker Buck, began his career in journalism at the Berkshire Eagle and was a longtime staff writer for the Hartford Courant. He has written for Vanity Fair, New York, Life, and many other publications, and his work has won the Penn New England Award, the Eugene S. Pulliam National Journalism Writing Award, and the Society of Professional Journalists Sigma Delta Chi Award. He is the New York Times bestselling author of The Oregon Trail, Flight of Passage, and First Job, and he lives in Tennessee. So now, without further ado, would you all please help me in warmly welcoming the
Thank you, Shane. I apologize for the delay tonight because there was a miscommunication. I had a schedule that said I had to be here at 7, not 6. And it's particularly humiliating because one of the things in this book that I described is helping to take care of my mother. I was delayed getting the book and to the trip too, because I have to take care of my mother up in Maine. She raised 11 of us children, and great Catholic lady. And she and the nuns were always, you may not be late. There was no question of failure. You may not be late. So I hope the wait is worth it. I want to talk tonight how I came to write this book. I'm only going to do one short reading, but I'm going to talk to you for a few minutes about how I came to write this book and what was significant about it. Then I'm going to show you some slides. And what I just want to say about starting out was in 2010, my brother and I took a covered wagon with 3 mules across the entire length of the Argonne Trail. Perhaps some of you read that book. And we didn't do it the way reenactors do it today. The Mormons spend a lot of time on the Argonne Trail, wagons pulled by horses and so forth. But in the evening, as everyone circles into the camp, you look over your shoulder and here comes a whole flotilla of pickup trucks bearing catered meals. They even have 53-foot semi-trailers now decked out as showers, and the wagon master is up there. Okay, folks, the GPS tells us we gotta go, and but we did it the real way. We had none of that. We just camped on the plains every night. If we were low on food, we went into a town or whatever. We pulled the covered wagon right into Walmart several times, shop for dinner, stuff like that. And as I said in that book, we lived a lot on Hormel chili, no beans. That was our diet all the way across. So what I found on that journey and in the subsequent book was that traveling according to the means of transportation of that age creates a wonderful social laboratory for you. First of all, we had to take the Rockies and all these difficult parts of the trail in a covered wagon. About half of the trail exists exactly as it did 150 years ago. So as I was traveling west across all the rivers of the plains, the Sweetwater, the Little Blue, the Big Blue, the Platte, you follow the Platte River for almost 800 miles. As I was traveling west, I was amazed at what extensive rivers, what large rivers the pioneers had to get across, and with what amazing facility they got across. And I just wondered, well, how did they get across these rivers? How did they do that? And then my answer came almost at the end of the trip when I reached a little town called the Dalles along the Columbia River, which is probably about 200 or 300 miles from your endpoint, Portland. And as I often do, I went into a local history room. The Dalles had built up as a town because during the trail years, most of the pioneers reached the west with their wagons in such terrible shape. The wagons were literally falling apart, broken axles, broken wheels, that they broke the wagons apart, took up all the boards, and repackaged them, rebuilt them as rafts or flatboats to go down the river. And a whole industry built up in the Dalles and similar towns to float the rest of the way. And sometimes they sold their mules and whatnot. And in one of the monographs that I found in the Dalles Public Library, which led me to other sources, this was possible. This transition to water travel after crossing the plains in a covered wagon was possible because of the considerable experience that all of the pioneers had built up over the last 2 generations during the great flatboat era. And I said, whoa, I read a lot more history than most people, and I had never heard of the great flatboat era. And this keyed into a very important theme for me, which is very rarely have we received middle school, high school, college. Very rarely have we received the history that actually happened. You have to go back and really study it much more profoundly to understand. So my mental health hasn't improved over the years. So when I decided to do the flatboat era, and having had no boating experience at all in my life, I said, well, it makes perfect sense to move to Tennessee and build with myself and another fellow helping another laboratory. This time it'd be a floating laboratory, and come down the route from Pittsburgh, which you can see at the very top, to New Orleans, 2,000 miles, to try and mimic the transportation mode and the understanding, the learning, just the sight of the river that the pioneers had. I'm not a reenactor. I actually don't like reenactors much, and I've had a lot of dealings with them, and they're prone to inaccuracies and all other kinds of problems too. They're obsessed with uniforms. They're not obsessed with what actually happened. So I did a lot of reading, and the reason it's so important, the reason it's so important to understand this is this is what I had to do all the way across the river, just make things up. The reason it's so important to understand this is that between 1843 and 1860, when the trail years were existed, approximately 500,000 Americans crossed the trails west of St. Louis here on the Oregon Trail and a few others, the old Platte River Road and so forth. That's important, and the settling of the West by covered wagon was significant. But it wasn't the first frontier, and it wasn't the American history that people should know. Between the American Revolution, even during the Revolution, settlers were streaming across the Appalachians into the Cumberland Gap down here, but also the Monongahela River in Pittsburgh. Were streaming across in anticipation of America winning the Revolution. And the Revolutionary War soldiers had already been promised in return for their service, because the country was bankrupt, that they would get free land in what was called the West. Between the American Revolution and the Civil War, 3 million Americans traveled down the Ohio River to its confluence with the Mississippi at Cairo, Illinois. And it was a much more significant migration than the relatively smaller migration in the 1850s. Once you understand that the country's history is riverine, that it was the development, this development along that red line, you can you start to understand and you start to explain a lot better the phenomenal development of America. In 1802, so there were 2 groups. There were pioneers traveling down in arcs with all their farm animals and farm implements, and they were going to settle the rich lands of Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana, and so forth. The second group was, which is the trip that I sought to follow, were the simple farmers and increasingly sophisticated traders and merchants who were building huge 100-foot flatboats capable of carrying 100 tons. In 1802, down to New Orleans to sell their product, which was the fastest growing export city in the world at the time. And this was all abetted by the 1803 purchase of the Louisiana Purchase by Thomas Jefferson. And now that land was ours, that country was ours. In 1802, out of the amount of cargo carried down to New Orleans by American farmers in approximately 600 or 700 flatboats, totaled a few 100,000 pounds. By the Civil War, it was 220 million tons. your understanding of American history then is enriched by knowing that it wasn't the myth of the pioneers on the dusty plains. It was the rivers that built America, just as in New England and in the original colonies. It was the rivers that all the traffic occurred on and all the development occurred on. Why is that important? Once you transform your mentality from, John Wayne and Clint Eastwood, crossing the plains, the Hollywood myth, to the riverine economy, you start to explain all the things that happened in the American culture that were so important. First of all, we were a river culture. During the flatboat era, during this period up to the Civil War, America became number one, uncontestably number one, in the most single most important product in the globe at the time, which was cotton. Cotton was causing the Industrial Revolution all over the world, particularly in Britain. By the 1840s, we were number two in the production of sugar. And all of those flatboat traffic came down and developed so-called the sugar coast along the Mississippi, particularly on the west side of the river. And all the wealthy planters in the old Tidewater country of Virginia and Maryland had transformed all their slaves down to the sugar coast. We produced, by the 1850s, a quarter of the world's supply of rice. So this phenomenal burst of America had so much wealth. It's very rare. It's similar to what's happening with China today. How did one country dominate global trading so quickly? And when you understand that you're drifting down the dams and everything else that are there today, weren't there, and you had plenty of current, you're drifting down millions of tons of cargo every month for free. Then it sails to England, it either sails up to the spinning factories of Lawrence and Lowell in Massachusetts, Providence, Rhode Island, or Liverpool or Leicester in England. There was a Senate report in the 1840s that said, I quote in the book, that said, it costs $3, an average of $3 per ton, to take cargo down all the way from Pittsburgh, all the way down to New Orleans, and carry it to England, $3 per ton. Okay. It cost $90 per ton to take it 100 miles overland. Okay. So, and as someone who knows mules and overland travel and all that kind of stuff, believe me, it's a lot easier to go on a boat. It's a lot quicker. America developed as this phenomenal country economically. During these years, the flatboat era created the American economy we know today, and still 30% of our GDP goes out along the rivers. Because the source of power, the source of energy, the propulsion for all this was free. It was either the drift of the river in those days before all the damming and all the other things that the Army Corps of Engineers has done. The Ohio was traveling about 7 miles per hour. Mississippi was traveling about 12 miles per hour. Then, from those ports, or Savannah or Charleston or whatever, they sailed for England with their product by sail. Okay. Even after the steamboats came in the 1870s, 1880s, steamboat transatlantic travel, 50% of the travel was by sailboat. So that's one interesting thing, and I realized, this is my space. I got to go there and see this. This is where the country was created, and I can tell a new version, a new conception of American history. But it wasn't just that. It was the multiculturalism that made America. Okay, from France, Huguenots who were escaping persecution by Louis XVI and so forth, came to America in great numbers, including some of my distant ancestors. And at the same time, from just friends, all the nobles were racing over here to America because they were about to get guillotined during the French Revolution. 1/3 of the population, by the early 19th century, 1/3 of the population of every American city and town was German. Then the Irish and the Italians came. During the Civil War, you remember there were German-speaking regiments, and their officers had to speak German in order to communicate with the men. They were Gaelic-speaking regiments, and so forth. Down the river came the roots music of the Scots-Irish, the Bohemian fiddles, the Italians who came in great numbers in the 1840s, under conditions that were of indentured servitude that almost approached slavery. The Italians brought the brass. You start to understand the development of jazz, blues, and all this. And it was much more than that. 7,000 words in the English language, 7,000 words. This was all New France. All of this was New France. 7,000 words in the English language are French roots. Bayou. Bayou is fascinating. The French trappers originally came in and they would have much more propensity than these kind of cold, spare Englishmen up in Ohio. The French guys never seen a woman, especially an indigenous woman. Oh, but she is so beautiful, They intermarried with alacrity into the tribes. Bayou was a Choctaw word that meant watercourse or wetlands, something like that. And the French, being so pliant as they were, they adopted that word into there. And then the French, because they'd been here earlier as fur traders and so forth, became the river guides for a lot of the other groups coming down. So another melting pot. Rapide was the rapids, and so forth. So the America, and I left these people that want to, all these immigrants are coming over to replace us, It's such a new trend, and they're going to take over the country, and they deal in drugs, whatever. No, it was always that. We were always a culture that thrived by mixing. That was the origins. So I'll just tell you one other story about the trip itself, then I'll show you some pictures, and I'm going to do one reading because I want to leave as much time as I can for questions. The big problem we faced on the river, and those of you who have read the book, Shane, that's Danny right there. Half the book wouldn't be here if Danny Corchulo hadn't been my first mate, but the big problem we faced on the river was fear. We would get somewhere and they'd hear, whoa, you gotta stop, it's raining up in Indianapolis now. When you get to the Wabash, and throughout my life, for particular reasons, I've known the Wabash really well. When you get to the Wabash, because of the rains, the current's gonna be so strong, it's gonna push you into Wabash Island, and you're not gonna get there. You're gonna be stranded, and the Coast Guard will have to come rescue you, and they'll probably confiscate your boat. So I looked at the situation. When we got to the confluence, I just did what I would do as airplane pilot, just yaw it into the current, and the current was strong, but it just pushed me in a straight line right where I wanted to go by pointing the nose in a certain direction. There were maelstroms, whirlpools in the river, especially in the Mississippi. We were told by fishermen and everybody else, the experts who supposedly do the river. So powerful that we would get into this thing, it would whirl the boat around. We would be unconscious by that time from centrifugal force. The boat would capsize, sink, be dragged along the bottom, and I had better prepare my family because when I floated back to the surface, I wouldn't even have my underwear on. And I write about in the book just a little bit of humor, how my Brooks Brothers boxer shorts felt about that. So then what happened was, there's so many people who lived along the river and their families have lost their homes during the great flooding, the succession of flooding. They fear the river. I write stories in the book about all the people I met whose fathers and brothers and nephews and so forth worked on the river on the tugboats and the barges, and they were killed in an accident. So there's a huge amount of fear, and fear rules what people think about the river instead of the truth. And so my journey was discovering the truth. How to discriminate between advice I was getting that was sound advice and advice I was getting that was just pure fear. And Shane, if you have any water over there, or if we can get some water, whatever. So I'll just tell you this one story. This epitomized the whole trip. And thank you. So we're going down the river, and this area, southern Ohio, southern Indiana, southern Illinois, if you've ever traveled up there, you know, you get south of Terre Haute. And so it's kind of amazing that you're still in Indiana, you're not going to be out of Indiana if you drive due south for another hour or two. But everybody's, you know, hey y'all, how you doing? It's very southern in outlook, very southern in style, and you know, and politics we're not going to talk about, but you know, what kind of lawn signs you see down through there, you know. And these deputy sheriffs would come down the boat. It was 2 or 3 times, and just local people, because it was a very dramatic looking boat. You'll see a picture in a second. And people would hear we tied up and they'd come down. And especially these deputy sheriffs, you know, we'd invite them on and we'd talk for a while. They go like, okay, now, what kind of weapons are you guys carrying? You know, we go, we're not carrying a weapon. We don't think we need that. We've been gone a month already. The whole trip, by the way, took us 4 months to get down. We've been gone a month already. No trouble. We're not worried. We don't need weapons. If you've ever seen a deputy sheriff from southern Ohio or southern Indiana look at you with an expression of profound disappointment and worry. You mean y'all's coming down this river, you don't have any weapons? You know? I said, well, why do we need weapons? And they said, you're going to get to Paducah, you're going to get to Louisville. And them kids, you're going to be parked right next to the projects there, and them kids is going to come out of them projects, storming down the streets, kill you and burn your boat. All right, well, we'll thank you for that advice. That was how much effort I had to spend editing good advice from bad advice. I said, thanks for the advice, but we're going to continue on. And then we got down to Baton Rouge, you know. 3 months later, we get down to Baton Rouge. And there's a beautiful gravel bar there where we parked for a couple days and made some fixes on the boat and reprovisioned and so forth. The river in Baton Rouge sort of separates the wealthy area of town from the inner city neighborhoods. And the black kids were just great. All the way along the river, by the way, the black kids were just great. They'd come down. You guys want some fish? We just shop, but we'll buy some from you for tomorrow night. You guys want some dope? You know, like, they could not have been nicer. They could not have been more hospitable. It was wonderful being with them. So we get to Baton Rouge, and the kids come over in, and we had the shop yet, and they had this really nice catfish. We cut it up, cooked it up, and we said, you guys, come on board, and we'll eat this together and have an evening together. And we sat there, we had a good time, the kids were very curious about us and so forth. And then finally one kid said, so what kind of heaters are you carrying? And some northern guy, we found Mississippi to be quite warm down here, and we don't think we need heaters. And the kid kind of gets his face up like Chris Rock. You got to be the dumbest white guy I've ever met. And I said, well, we just don't think we need him. He says, you're still dumb like that. He said, you're about to enter Cajun country, 50 miles down here, Cajun country, and them guys is gonna come storming out of the swamps, burn your boat, and kill you. And it was just so fascinating that two totally diametric groups had the same had fear and had the same conclusion about America. And south of Baton Rouge is a lovely stretch in Mississippi with sandbars running up to the horizon like the Cape Cod seashore. You can't see it anymore. And beautiful flocks. It was October by then. It was migration. Beautiful flocks of American white pelicans, which is the largest bird in North America, actually. And the beauty of it sort of tantalized me and mesmerized me and everything. And I realized, wow, there's so many things like this in America. This is what I'm learning on the river. It's not about guns. It's about fear. And once you understand that, the expression of the problem is often a very different noun or a very different thing than the source of the problem. The trip kind of made sense. Because that's what I learned. I just shared a couple of things that I learned. Okay, Danny, now I'm going to try this. Ready? I can do things with this, like if I press a button, Well, that's the video. They didn't see the video, did they? I think to make it short, should I play the video again?
Yes.
All right. This will give you a sense of the trip and the goal. Then I'm just going to do one reading and everybody. Okay, Danny, you said to hit the space bar.
I did it both, basically, two reasons. First of all, all of us grew up with the conception of history that the pioneer period was horses, mules, oxen, and cars, wagons crossing the plains. So it was a surprise to me when I learned that, in fact, the frontier really began 50 years before, right after the Revolution. And it was down the watersheds of the big inland rivers, the Ohio, Mississippi, and their tributaries. This fundamentally changed my conception of history. And so I wanted to build a flatboat and go those 2,000 miles from Elizabeth, PA to New Orleans and use the trip as kind of a vessel that I could tell the history through. What surprised me the most was the diversity of the populations, the multiculturalism of America, that people think we've just invented that and we're just talking about it nowadays. Certain people on the far right, they just want to define Americans as a bunch of white guys, we're being invaded. No, it was never just a bunch of white guys. It was a very big mix of native peoples and Europeans and so forth. But also very surprised with how quickly a complicated economy burst on the rivers. The speed with which the American economy expanded during this period was extraordinary.
It's a feeling of great accomplishment because I started this trip not much of a boater.
New airplanes, I was a licensed pilot and had this from a young age. And I knew horses and mules because I'd grown up with them. But I've never been a boatman, and so I had to teach myself a whole new set of skills. That was a very great lesson because I made the mistake of all amateurs, that I relied on the advice of people who said they knew what they were doing, and they didn't. We'd be going down the river, and all these people who were supposedly experts, they would tell us, you can't go through those whirlpools on the river because your boat will crash, and you'll be sucked over the bottom, and you won't even have your underwear on when you come back up and try to retrieve your family. Things like that simply were not accurate. So that was the biggest thing I learned, which was that the skills I needed to get down the river resided within me already, but I had to draw them out by experience. That is significant because the flatboat experience, which created the American global economy, was undertaken by untrained, uneducated farmers. And they had to teach themselves going down the river. And they were completely inexperienced. It was teaching themselves to conquer fear.
All right, coming into the dock at Audubon Park in New Orleans. What a fitting ending to this glorious trip.
Okay, so that was a video which somebody used to is kind of a promotional thing, but I found that it worked pretty well with my talk. So this is the flatboat, which we named the Patience, because it's going to take a lot of patience to get down the river. And you can see people question what the design was. Because it's flat all the way across the bottom and no V-hull, okay? It displaces much more water per linear foot than a V-hull. So we put this in, it was 8 tons made this way and then 10 tons once we had it loaded. And I had just finished, we put this in the Cumberland River just to give it a little water test for a couple days. And I had just measured how much draft we had at 8 tons, and it was 18 inches, you know. And that was the secret of the flatboat era. A flat boat that could bump over rocks and shoals and everything, because the river in those days was just fissured with sandbars, rocks, big, huge tree snacks, etc. So that was the secret. It was 42 feet long, 14 foot across, and that was generally the beam to length ratio 1:4. This is in an earlier phase, and somebody asked me the other night, well, what's that thing up on the top? Was that where you put the air conditioning? And it was actually chickens. So here we are. I decided to do this route, Elizabeth, PA, which is near Pittsburgh, to New Orleans, because that was the first big trip made by a fellow named Jacob Yoder in 1882. And he's credited, there were probably others, but he is credited with making the first successful trip. And he actually took all his farm products from Pennsylvania. He was a Swiss German from Pennsylvania. He took them all down to New Orleans. It was a very courageous trip in those days. Sold them for script, which he traded for beaver pelts in Havana, and got back to Baltimore at a $4,000 profit, which in those days was practically a fortune. And when word got out that this had happened, it was written up in a few Pennsylvania papers. It exploded, and the very next year, river traffic exploded. This is Elizabeth, PA, with the boat. We just have the boat in there. I like this picture because it shows just town after town after town going down on the Ohio, which is one beautiful river town after another. And I read in the book how the mayor of the town is a wonderful fellow named Barry Berkshire. Took me down the Monongah Hill the first day and taught me how to steer around the barge traffic and all that kind of stuff. This shows you, even though coal is dying, and I have a chapter about the death of coal and what that means for the river today, it's still a very active commodity carried on the river, and this is what we saw all along the river. You can see up towards the top, that's actually coal being offloaded for an electrical generating facility somewhere along the Ohio. And those are all the barges that have just been emptied. And steering around them and kind of understanding the river traffic was the biggest challenge of the trip. I think we just have this picture here to show how beautiful it was along the river some days. There's 20 locks and dams on the Ohio River. On the lower Mississippi, there are none. And learning how to enter the locks, tie it up, and sort of follow the protocol and everything was important. And it was also scary at first, because you get in the locks, and then at first when they have a job, they drop the water, and these big tall walls are way on top of you, and it feels like they're going to fall in and crash the boat. So that was a big part of the trip. I'd never been in a lock before. I didn't know what a lock was. And, this just gives you, this is somewhere along the Ohio, but it just gives you the sense of don't know why we have all those chairs out on the dock there, Danny, but it must have been, we must have had dinner al fresco or something. But this is well, what it looked like. And this was a typical evening camp. It was quite a beautiful trip, really. I brought along an electric bike. The electric bike becomes a character in the book because there are no marinas to speak of along both rivers, but especially none on the Mississippi. So, and everybody said that was another fear, you know. We saw 4 pleasure boats on the entire Mississippi River. 4 boats that weren't tugs with barges. And everyone said, you're not gonna make it, and you're gonna die. Again, you know, I'm dead so many times, it's kind of fun. Because there's no marinas, there's no fuel. So I got an electric bike, and we rode into town every couple of days. I could carry 36 gallons on that cargo model of the bike. And it was really fun because you lift it up over the levees, push through a little bit of trees, and then look in the nearest town, there was sort of a nimbus of light, you know. And I learned riding for those towns that it was the light was from the Dairy Queen. And you get into town, and if there was a Dairy Queen there was gas not far away. It's another shot that just shows you how beautiful it was along the river. I think that's in the morning when the sun was shining on the boat. Now this picture is interesting because it shows you negotiating the barge traffic and staying out of the way of the tugs, which was the biggest job we had on the river. It was something I learned, you know, I got fairly good at, and that was another thing, you know, it was another way I was going to die. You know, the barges were going to push us into the wing dams on the edge, blah, blah, blah. But in this picture, there's actually a coal barge in the foreground, another tugboat on that, over towards the bank and over here. And I was actually talking to that captain, and he said, at first, you know, they'd see this boat on the river and they'd go, well, there's some kind of lacquer, I don't know. Because the tugboat captains were hilarious. Some kind of like, I don't know, pirate boat up there. And I don't know, just keep an eye on it. It doesn't look very reliable to me. By the end of the trip, because these guys are all on Facebook pages and they've got cell phones and email threads and all this, they go with, hey, there's some flatboat patients. I just saw your Facebook page today. You need any help getting down the river today? And a lot of times we did. But what happened here, there was another coal barge over here, and this captain in the white tug, and you can see, you know, we're relatively close. He came on and he said, just stay where you are. Just keep right on that exact course. And I'll talk to the other traffic and make sure they stay out of your way. And that's pretty much what happened as we went down the road. Once they knew that we were reliable, and a lot of the times we had to hug all the buoys on one side. I said, I'm going to stay on these buoys on the Kentucky side, and I won't deviate. And it was very important to show them at the bow of the boat I was not going to deviate. And then they knew they were safe. They weren't going to run you over. Because the dread of every tugboat captain is crazy pleasure craft that pull in front of them with a water skiers or something. And there are accidents, not maybe every year, but it's something they really dread. These are mooring cells. Those big tall cylinders are called mooring cells. And there was one interesting thing about the river that I taught myself. Nobody told me this, but I just figured it out, which is, okay, a full barge with coal is drawing 9 feet. An empty barge is drawing 3 feet, okay? And that barge, by the way, is just the direct successor to the flatboat. But when there was a lot of traffic coming around the river, and you know, we could be on the river with 5 or 6 other barge steerings at a time. I always knew I could pull along. These are called fleet moorings. All that coal is waiting to be offloaded to this power plant down there. Well, it was 3 feet. I was only drawing 2 feet. I always knew that I could go for safety for the barge fleets. And some of these barge fleets were miles and miles along the river because there's so much coal being carried down the river. And it was just something I taught myself, but it got us to New Orleans because, especially the last 100 miles into New Orleans, which is really carried with a lot of traffic, I just hugged those parked barges and I was always safe. Where is that, Danny? Ohio, okay.
Near Kentucky border.
Okay, so Danny got off that day, took this picture from a bridge, and then, I don't know, I think you had a rental car because you were going home for a week or so. Then ran down the river. He wanted to take pictures of us from afar. But it sort of gives you a sense of how big the Ohio is. It's, the Ohio is a bigger river, larger river, more flow, more cubic feet per inch, per foot or whatever, than the Mississippi is here. It's the Ohio's drainage into the Mississippi, which makes it such a massive river. So that was going down the Ohio, and it was just, you know, it made you feel small and tiny, but romantic. Fat Boys, what was it called, Dave? Fat Boys Floating Restaurant in Augusta, Ohio or something. We pulled in there, and it was probably a Tuesday or Wednesday. They weren't real busy, and we had lunch at Fat Boys. It was a good lunch, and then the owner said, "Well, why don't you just park here and have a nice evening, whatever?" And I said, "Well, we need to push on. We're trying to make miles every day." And he goes, "Well, after 5 o'clock, I'll provide free gin and tonics." You know, we'll stay. And that's just the sunset. Danny, you went up, wasn't that the town where you went up and got an Airbnb?
Yeah, it's haunted.
Yeah, oh, it's haunted, right? Yeah, Danny went up to get an Airbnb just to have a night off the boat, and it turned out his room was haunted. There's a funny incident in the book where somebody who was along on the trip said, "Don't ever have women on your boat because they use too much water." And the two best crew members I had were Cynthia Lee and Deb Satterfield. And they were along on and off for a good 1,000 miles of the trip. And navigation was very important. Somebody had to steer and somebody had to navigate. You had to know the exact mile marker you were at. And they weren't always easy to find because the federal government doesn't maintain the river very well and let trees and stuff go over the mile marker. So it was Cynthia's job right there to navigate and know exactly where we were, because it also meant where she could be on the river. And then if a tugboat came along and said, "Well, just where are you?" And you'd say, "Mile 101, you know, I got it. All right, good, I got you now on my radar, you know." But you had to know that, and there were several instances we had on the river where, you know, sailboats were adrift and they were just, getting lost and this and that. And the guy was reporting his position 10 miles off. He was 10 miles off where he's reporting. So it was like, that put him in another county. And so the rescue boat from another county was trying to find him, you know, but he wasn't there, you know. So there's just another beautiful evening scene. We spent a lot of time parked against some levees. That's against some levees. And I had to learn how to tie up according to the drift and the winds. Along the Mississippi especially, I think that's in Tiftonville, Danny, but anyway, along the Mississippi especially, you have to learn how to tie up properly because you're in current all the time. You never get out of the current. And there's another example of the barges and push by. That's a 9,000 horsepower tug right there. And one of the things, and there's another one over there. So one of the things that I learned to do, and the tugboat captain's really great about, is if the situation was a little hairy and I was too close to traffic, I would just pull right up to the stern of that white tug there and follow him as long as I had to remain safe. And the captain kind of looked back and go, "Yeah." Anyway, that's about it. That's Danny, you know, I don't know, he's whatever. He was a good crewman. Questions? Oh, here we go. that's the famous artist of the flatboat era was George Caleb Bingham, and most of his pictures are in the Corcoran Gallery in the White House and stuff like that now. But he was actually based in St. Louis, and this is called the Johnny Boatman, and my boat was partially based on that. So I'm not going to do my reading because I think we went on long enough, and I can do a reading, but I know I'd rather keep it short and let everybody ask questions. So, and if there's agitation for me to do a reading, you can chase me down the street afterwards. Go ahead, Shane.
I know you encountered some dangers and
Yes.
broke your ribs twice? Once?
Twice.
Yeah. Would it have been too dangerous to do the trip without a motor in today's world?
Yes, you can't drift on the river today. The Ohio River has 20 dams, and what is in between is basically a placid lake, and it's called a managed pool, according to how much water they release from the dams. And there's not enough current to really push you along, so you needed a boat, you needed a motor, but also the Coast Guard will come and take you off the river if you're a hazard to navigation. And if you're just drifting and you can't really steer your way away from the barge traffic, you will be in trouble. So no, you cannot make the trip without a motor today. I mean, you could, And there's a lot of people that kayak and canoe down, and there's a wonderful guy who runs a website called River Gator named John Rusky, whom I met and spent a fair amount of time. He leads school kids down on canoe trips and builds his own canoes. Very significant guy. But that's substantially different because in a canoe you can always paddle, have almost no draft, and you can always paddle outside the buoys, and you can usually see the traffic coming miles and miles away. So you're paddling outside the buoys right on the shore, and you're safe. And then when you get to a long straightaway and there's no traffic, you can go wherever you want. But you do have to keep an eye on, I'm talking with Rusky about this a lot, you do have to keep your eye on a lot because that traffic can come up on you fairly quickly if you're not being careful. So you pretty much need a motor nowadays. And I'm not one of these reenactors. I'm not trying to, have the right buttons, I wanted to write a good book about the river, and the way to see it was creating a flatboat that I could take down. Please.
Where is the boat now?
The boat is, so I had a difference on pricing when I got to the end of the trip, and there was a dispute between me and the boat builder. I don't need to go into the details. And the settlement of that was that he would be responsible for taking the boat away. And it's now somewhere, I think it's somewhere upriver here and being used as a static exhibition about flatboating or something like that. I don't really know. I tried to sell it for lumber when I got to New Orleans because it's something I forgot to say in my introduction before, but 15% of the profits of the flatboating trips, because they were one-way boats, they just floated down. 15% of the profits came from selling the lumber once you got it. It was a floating lumber yard. So I tried to do that, but nowadays a guy you call him, you want to make some sidewalks out of my, so we don't do that anymore. Please. That was poplar. It was green poplar, and it kind of separated and made little bit of holes as it dried. But it's a very, very durable lumber, and it was something I learned and I read about in the book because there's 86 different species of poplar in North America, and up in New England where I come from, poplar is just a junk wood. It's really you don't even want it for firewood. And so I didn't think of it as a hardwood, but the very bottom was oak, because that could hit rocks and things and be a little stronger, but it was poplar, yeah.
Was wind a problem?
Wind was a problem, especially when docking, and especially during thunderstorms, okay? And I have sections on both. And the thing was, I'm going down in this 10 10-ton wooden thing. And I'm an airplane pilot, and I know this importance of wind. Okay. And I got about 10 tons of poplar. Those, you know, all of Danny's cooking instruments. You know, the wind's not going to affect me at all. No, it had a huge impact. So there was a guy along early on the trip named Brady Card. He gave me a little bit of lesson, and what you do is you pull upwind of where you're going to dock. Just shut the motor, not shut the motor down, but idle. Just see what the wind's doing. 90% of the time, you can just see what the wind's doing, and nature will do itself and put you right to the dock. You know. But once you do that, then you know what you're fighting against. And in thunderstorms, I have a whole chapter about the importance of thunderstorms and some beautiful writing about thunderstorms that the pioneers did and so forth. But in a thunderstorm, you gotta point into the wind and just hold that course. And that's why we had a compass, because couldn't see much. Hold the compass course. And the pattern of the thunderstorms that summer, where they were pop-up storms coming off major cell systems way off the river, they were gone in about 10 or 15 minutes, so you didn't have long that you had to survive. But the wind was a big factor, yes. Please, go ahead.
I'm curious about your writing technique. Were you taking notes every night?
Yes. Yeah, I spent about 45 minutes a night. I tried, because I find if you really write it down, this is what happened in Tiptonville, but this is what happened at the Gallipolis locks or whatever. You can really write accurately. You can write with some incredible verisimilitude, because, and I go, wow, I don't remember to write that way, but my notes were good. And so I set a rule: we'd stop at night, and I'd take notes for 45 minutes or an hour. Then I can have a gin and tonic. So I kind of motivated myself to, so yeah, take, and I'm an obsessive researcher. When you read the book, you'll see it. I live in little local history rooms and discovering new people from that era and so forth. Please.
What was your most dangerous time on the whole trip?
The most dangerous time on the whole trip, I guess, was when I got to New Orleans. I agreed that a pilot, one of the river pilots, take me on board one of the big Panamax ships and show me how they take the ships up there. And he said, "Here, hop on board." We get out there. It's this big, huge ship. And I said, "Yeah." And you climb up there. You climb up to the boat on a rope ladder, and the wind was blowing, and I'm going, and I finally got up there, and this crew member pulled me on. I said, well, what would have happened if I slipped and fell there? He goes, well, you wouldn't notice much, because the undertow would have just dragged you over. So, and that was probably the most dangerous. But I think a few encounters, I had an encounter with, I planned it. I knew it had to happen once. Near Tan down there in Arkansas, below Crothersville, a big tug pushing a big string came around a bend, and he was slow because the current was behind us, and I was fast. And I knew that this was going to happen, and I planned for it. I just said, there's no way I can get out of his way, I'm going around. And I did. I went just right up onto the bar. And then I talked to the captain, and he said, "Oh, that was kind of nice. You pulled off for me." Most of these people find all where he's going, assholes. That was nice. And then I said, "Well, I'm stuck in this bar now, but if you come by and really aim your," because he was going to be on a straightaway now, and I knew he could angle his boat whatever way he wanted. I said, if you push your wake over, he's going to push over about 5 feet of water, and I'll float right off. I said, I just need your wake to get off. And he goes, and you're going to get it. And he just raised me right off, And then as we were sailing away, I knew this would help too. Had a big American flag on the boat. By the way, that's a nice American flag. So it was. that was probably the most dangerous point, but I kind of thought it through. I knew I had to run aground at some point, and let's get used to the idea. Please.
You talk about fear and how you saw it expressed from different cultures along the
Yes.
way. And I was curious about how that manifested on the other book, on the Oregon Trail, and how did they relate in terms of that?
Yeah, like people said, like we pulled into this one ranch that friends had called ahead and said, we're gonna pull in that ranch. And I was 60 then, okay, my brother was like 54, so we pulled in, but basically looked the way I do now. I pulled in and I heard the rancher's wife say to the rancher, she goes, my God, I didn't think they'd be old. You know? So they just thought it was way too arduous. And then when we came down the Rockies in a covered wagon, I had to tie locks behind the wagon and all this kind of stuff because we were coming straight down. There's only so much you could do with the brakes, and we were on a very narrow path, and the other side was a cliff, 300 feet drop. So there was a lot of fear, but the most interesting thing was misinformation. So when you're in a wagon with mules, okay, you really feel the hill. You know where the hills are. But most people, they're racing by this country in a pickup truck, you know. And I go, now look, at the edge of your ranch there, when we get close to Sweetwater, are there any hills? No hills, it's level all the way, you know. And then you get there, whoa. So it was the knowledge of the land, the knowledge of how things are, has changed because of the combustion engine and so forth. Please.
What was the most beautiful stretch? You mentioned right downriver of Baton Rouge.
Yes.
And then on the Ohio River, like combination, nice water and beautiful.
But the most beautiful thing on the Ohio River was, okay, the most beautiful stretch were the stretches of the lower Mississippi, say down into Louisiana, Mississippi and Louisiana, where you just had, because of the curves of the river, you had sandbars on either side, very beautiful, and extraordinary, and the autumn migration was happening, so extraordinary wildlife, birds, you know. And then, in Ohio, I have to say the most beautiful thing on the Ohio River was river towns, especially in the evening as you approach them from afar. They have all these beautiful old iron facades and everything. I had a whole chapter on iron facades, you know, beautiful iron facades and how they were developed during the Flatboat era and everything. That was one of those things that, my editor said, okay, Rinker, I think they've read enough about this. Just check the chapter. You would approach these towns like Newburgh or Marietta, whatever that town was where George Clooney grew up, along the Ohio. And they just looked from a distance like a Fabergé egg. They're just this beautiful architectural and spires and church steeples and stuff. Under the evening pastel sunlight. And so the towns from afar are beautiful. And actually then when you get into the towns, they're actually quite scenic. And some of these were great river towns in their day, and they're now sort of being revived as tourist meccas because you can take a drive down the Ohio River and just see town after town. Shane, what do you say? One more question?
One more right here.
Right here? Okay, please, sir.
I got two parts. Did you always stay in the main channel, or did you go, take some side channels around islands or anything?
The U.S. Army Corps maps have what they call the sail line marked, and that's the best combination of deep water and distance away from obstacles. So you try and stay on the sail line as much as possible, but when the tugs were there, you couldn't always do that because they really had to stay on the sail line. But on the Ohio, you could cheat the buoys a little bit, they weren't so, and once in a while, just fire on the throttle. A couple times we got stuck, but you push yourself off the poles. But the Mississippi, and that was the biggest problem I had when I first got to the Mississippi. If there's a buoy on the Mississippi, and a lot on the Ohio, a lot of times a buoy will wash away and it'll be somewhere else. And, so you learn to take the buoys kind of on the Ohio as kind of advice, but not necessarily. When you get to the Mississippi, that buoy, that means that you can look down from the edge of the boat and it's a sandbar right there that starts as a cliff. So, yeah, but the great thing for me was, again, this was got a lot of advice from people that know what they're talking about. If you get stuck on a sandbar, you'll never get off. If you wake up in the morning and they drop the water level from the dam up above you and you're in the mud, you won't get off, blah, blah, blah. And, like, the most fun time was when I was in Battletown, Kentucky, and a farmer came down driving his John Deere with those tongs in front of it. It's John Deere tractor. And I said, well, I don't know, people told me I get stuck and they dropped the water level. And I mean, it was so muddy that there was mud coming up on the floor of the boat, And I said to the farmer, I said, well, I don't know, I said, I get the boat this stuck on mud, I'd never get out of here again, And he goes, that's bullshit. And he just pushed his John Deere tractor and just threw me in the river. So you kind of learn, I mean, there was a solution for everything. You just had to be relaxed and find it,
And what was the canoe for that you carried on that?
The canoe was just for the early part of the trip. I actually regret, that was another piece of advice we got from our boat builder, and it was completely wrong, that you couldn't tow a canoe, even though all the old flatboats did. Because every time you had to back up or do something, you'd run over it, which was bold. It was just wrong. So, but that was, someone was on the boat early and brought their canoe. But I wished that we had one, because it would have been easier to get to land in certain situations. But again, I just became, it was really fun teaching myself how to tie up. And I tie up against the levees in any current, whatever. And the tugs would come by all night and throwing big rockers at you. But by triangulating lines and putting in string lines and stuff like that, the trick to tying up was, leave it flexible, So, but that's why the canoe was there, and I wish that I had brought one along of my own originally, but I was given the advice that it was dangerous. That it was just completely wrong. So, Shane, I think we're good, right?
Yeah, another big giant round of applause for Rinker Buck.